The studio lights were bright, but the tension was brighter. Before a single difficult word was spoken, before a single uncomfortable pause filled the air, there was already something in the room that viewers at home could feel but couldn't yet name. It was the kind of atmosphere that only live television can create, where no script can save you, no edit can soften a moment, and no one truly knows what is about to happen next. Subscribe to The Truth Narrator, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What unfolded on that episode of The View was not loud. It wasn't explosive. There was no shouting, no dramatic walk-off, no viral argument that flooded social media in seconds. Instead, it was something far more powerful and far more uncomfortable. An emotional shift that happened in real time, in front of millions of viewers, between one of the most respected actresses in Hollywood and one of the most seasoned hosts on daytime television. Viola Davis is known for her composure, for her control, for the way she commands a room without ever raising her voice. She has built a career on emotional honesty, but always on her own terms. Interviews with her are often thoughtful, reflective, and deeply personal, but carefully guided by a mutual understanding between interviewer and guest. Sunny Hostin, on the other hand, is known for asking questions that matter. She is direct, intelligent, and unafraid to go deeper than surface-level conversation. As a co-host of The View, she has developed a reputation for turning interviews into meaningful discussions rather than promotional appearances. On that day, those two strengths collided. The episode had been promoted as a heartfelt conversation about Viola Davis's life, her career, and the deeply personal themes from her memoir and public advocacy work. Viewers expected inspiration. They expected vulnerability. What they didn't expect was the moment when the conversation crossed an invisible line. And once it did, there was no way to go back. From the outside, everything began normally. Applause, smiles, warm greetings, the familiar rhythm of daytime television. But beneath that surface, something subtle began to change. The tone shifted almost imperceptibly. A question lingered a second longer than usual. A pause stretched just slightly beyond comfort. For anyone watching casually, it might have seemed like just another interview. But for those paying attention, there was a growing sense that the conversation was heading somewhere neither woman had fully prepared for. Because this wasn't just about a movie, or a book, or a career milestone. This was about memory, trauma, identity, and who gets to ask about it on live television. Viola Davis has spoken publicly about her childhood before. She has shared stories of poverty, hunger, and hardship with remarkable courage. But there is a difference between choosing to tell your story and being asked to revisit it unexpectedly, under bright studio lights, in front of a live audience. Sunny Hostin's question did not come from a place of hostility. It came from a place of curiosity and seriousness. But the weight of it landed differently than anyone anticipated. And in that moment, something changed in Viola's expression. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shock. It was something quieter, something more human. A look that said, "This is harder than I thought it would be." The audience in the studio felt it first. The energy shifted. Applause faded faster than usual. The co-hosts became noticeably still. Even the camera seemed to linger longer on Viola's face, as if waiting for her to decide how she wanted to respond. Not as an actress, not as a public figure, but as a person. This is what makes live television so unpredictable. You cannot rehearse emotional truth. What made this moment so powerful wasn't confrontation in the traditional sense. It was the realization, unfolding second by second, that the conversation had reached a place where professionalism, empathy, and emotional boundaries were all being tested at once. Sunny Hostin leaned in slightly, listening carefully. Viola Davis took a breath. A long one. And in that breath, millions of viewers realized they were witnessing something far more personal than an interview. They were watching someone decide in real time how much of themselves they were willing to give. The View has hosted countless celebrities over the years. There have been political debates, viral arguments, tense exchanges, and awkward moments. But this felt different because it wasn't dramatic. It was deeply emotional. There were no raised voices, only raised stakes. The kind that exist when someone's lived experience becomes the subject of live discussion without a clear script to guide it. And for Viola Davis, whose strength has always been in telling her story with dignity and intention, the unexpected turn of the conversation forced her into a moment of raw honesty that few celebrities ever allow cameras to capture. Viewers at home leaned closer. Social media, later on, would describe it as that moment you could feel through the screen. But at the time, no one had words for it. Only the sense that something important was happening. Something unscripted. Something real. Sunny Hostin wasn't trying to provoke. She was trying to understand. But the question she asked reached into a place that Viola had carefully learned how to speak about only in certain contexts. And this context, live TV, daytime audience, promotional appearance, was not one of them. Yet Viola didn't shut down. She didn't deflect. She didn't laugh it off or pivot to safer territory. Instead, she did something far more revealing. She paused. And that pause became the emotional center of the entire interview. Because in that silence, viewers saw the cost of telling your story again and again. They saw the effort it takes to revisit painful memories, even for someone as strong and articulate as Viola Davis. And they saw Sunny Hostin realize, almost in real time, that the question had touched something deeper than intended. No one interrupted. No one filled the silence. The show, for a few seconds, stopped being television and became something else entirely. A human moment. A turning point. What began as a standard celebrity interview slowly transformed into a reflection on trauma, resilience, and the invisible emotional labor behind public storytelling. And the most remarkable part? None of it was planned. By the time the conversation moved forward, the energy in the room had permanently shifted. The smiles were softer. The laughter, when it came, was gentler. The tone had changed in a way that could not be reversed. This was no longer just promotion. This was something viewers would remember long after the episode ended. Because sometimes the most powerful confrontations don't look like confrontations at all. They look like honesty meeting curiosity under the bright lights of live television. And as the segment continued, one question lingered in the minds of everyone watching. How did a simple interview turn into one of the most emotionally revealing moments The View had seen in years? In the days leading up to Viola Davis's appearance on The View, the tone surrounding her public image was deeply reflective. She was not in the middle of a scandal, not promoting a controversy, not defending herself against headlines. Instead, she was in a phase of her career defined by openness and legacy. Her memoir had brought renewed attention to her childhood, her struggles, and the emotional weight she carried long before she ever stepped onto a stage or in front of a camera. Interviews across major networks had focused on resilience, survival, and the cost of becoming who she is today. Audiences were responding with admiration, empathy, and respect. But there was something important about those previous interviews. They had all happened in controlled environments. Long-form sit-downs, one-on-one conversations, settings where the pace was slower, the tone more intimate, and where Viola had the space to navigate difficult memories on her own terms. She could choose when to go deep, when to pause, and when to gently move forward. The View was different. The View is fast. It's live. It moves with the rhythm of multiple hosts, live reactions, and a studio audience that responds instantly to emotion. It's a format designed for dynamic conversation, not careful emotional pacing. Sunny Hostin, as a former federal prosecutor and legal analyst, has a particular style. She listens carefully, and when something interests her, she doesn't let it pass. She leans in. She asks follow-up questions that go beyond what's written in the press notes. That quality has made her interviews meaningful, but also at times unexpectedly intense. Producers likely expected a heartfelt discussion. They likely anticipated tears, inspiration, and applause. What they may not have anticipated was how the structure of the show itself would place Viola in a situation where deeply personal topics would surface without the protective pacing she was used to. Because on The View, there is no slowing down once the conversation starts. There are time cues, commercial breaks, transitions, other hosts waiting to speak. The momentum carries everyone forward, whether they're emotionally ready or not. Viola arrived composed, professional, and warm. Her body language at the start of the segment reflected confidence. She smiled easily. She laughed with the hosts. She spoke about her work, her advocacy, and her journey with clarity and pride. But beneath that calm presence was something viewers couldn't yet see. Fatigue. Not physical exhaustion, but emotional fatigue from telling the same painful story repeatedly across multiple interviews in recent weeks. Each time she spoke about her childhood poverty, hunger, and trauma, she reopened memories that never truly close. And yet, she did it because she believed in the importance of sharing those experiences. Sunny Hostin, having read the memoir and followed Viola's interviews, was clearly moved by those stories. Her interest was genuine. She wanted to understand more. She wanted the audience to understand more. That intention set the stage for what was about to happen. Because curiosity, when paired with live television, can move faster than emotional readiness. As the interview progressed, the conversation gradually shifted from career highlights to personal history. It wasn't abrupt. It happened naturally, seamlessly, almost invisibly. Sunny asked about specific passages from the memoir. Viola answered thoughtfully. The audience responded with quiet attention. The other hosts listened closely. But then came a follow-up question. A question that went beyond what Viola had been asked in previous interviews. A question that wasn't about what happened, but about how it still felt. And that subtle difference changed everything. Most interviews ask celebrities to recount events. This question asked Viola to revisit emotion. Not memory, but feeling. Not history, but present impact. It's a powerful question in the right setting. But in the fast-moving environment of The View, it arrived without the emotional runway Viola usually had to prepare herself. For viewers watching casually, it may have seemed like a thoughtful, empathetic inquiry. But for Viola, it meant stepping into a place she had carefully navigated only in certain contexts. Her posture shifted slightly. Not dramatically, just enough for observant viewers to notice. Her shoulders dropped. Her smile faded into something more neutral. Sunny noticed it too. And this is where the tension began to build. Not because of conflict, but because both women were now aware that the conversation had entered delicate territory. Sunny leaned forward, listening closely. Viola slowed down her speech. The energy in the room changed from conversational to contemplative. And yet, the show kept moving. There was no pause button, no chance to reset, no opportunity for producers to redirect the topic. This is the hidden pressure of live daytime television. Emotional depth doesn't always align with broadcast timing. The co-hosts, sensing the shift, grew quieter. The audience stopped reacting. Even the usual background noise of applause and murmurs disappeared. Viola wasn't uncomfortable because the question was inappropriate. She was uncomfortable because it required her to access something she hadn't planned to access in that moment. There is a difference between sharing your story and reliving it. Sunny's question blurred that line. And Viola, ever professional, chose not to avoid it. Instead, she prepared herself to answer. But that preparation took time. A few seconds longer than television usually allows. A few seconds that stretched into noticeable silence. Those seconds were the beginning of the emotional turning point. Viewers at home may not have understood why the pause felt heavy. But they felt it. They sensed that this was no longer a routine exchange. Something real was unfolding. The remarkable part is that no one did anything wrong. There was no hostility, no aggression, no confrontation in the traditional sense. Just two intelligent women navigating the unpredictable territory of live conversation about painful lived experiences. And the more Sunny listened, the more she seemed to realize that her curiosity had opened a door that required great care to walk through. Viola's response began slowly. Measured, thoughtful. But behind her words was visible effort. The effort of managing emotion while remaining composed on national television. This wasn't acting. This wasn't performance. This was emotional labor happening in real time. And the studio felt it. By now, the interview had quietly transformed from a promotional appearance into something deeper. Something neither the hosts nor the audience had anticipated when the segment began. Because when you ask someone how their trauma still feels, not what happened, but how it lingers, you are no longer talking about the past. You are standing with them in the present. And that is where things became difficult. As Viola spoke, Sunny maintained eye contact, nodding gently, listening with seriousness. But her expression revealed something else. Awareness that this conversation had crossed into territory that required more than journalistic curiosity. It required empathy, patience, and space. And space is the one thing live television rarely gives. The moment was approaching, the one viewers would later describe as unforgettable. Not because of what was said, but because of what it cost to say it. And everyone in the room could feel that cost rising with every passing second. Sunny Hostin did not interrupt. She didn't rush to the next question. She didn't try to soften the moment with humor or transition. She simply waited. Viola Davis sat there, hands loosely folded in her lap, eyes steady but distant for a brief second, as if she were deciding how far back she was willing to go. Not in memory, but in feeling. The cameras stayed close on her face. There was no background music. No audience reaction. No movement from the other hosts. Just silence. And in live television, silence is louder than anything else. Sunny's question still lingered in the air. It had been simple in wording but heavy in meaning. She had asked Viola not just about what she endured as a child, but how those experiences still lived inside her today. Viola inhaled slowly. Her lips parted slightly as if to speak, but no words came out yet. She blinked once, twice, her gaze dropping for a moment before returning to Sunny. That was the first visible sign that this was no longer a rehearsed conversation. She wasn't searching for the right quote from her book. She was searching for the right way to describe something that doesn't easily translate into words. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than before. Measured. Careful. She began by acknowledging the difficulty of the question. Not defensively, not critically, but honestly. She explained that when you grow up with certain experiences, you don't simply leave them behind. They don't stay in the past. They shape how you see the world, how you see yourself, and how you move through life. As she spoke, the audience remained completely still. Sunny listened intently, her expression serious, compassionate, but noticeably aware that this moment required patience rather than prompting. Viola described how memories of hunger, fear, and instability don't disappear just because circumstances change. Success doesn't erase them. Awards don't quiet them. Fame doesn't soften them. Her voice never broke, but there was a thickness to it, a weight behind each word that made it clear this was not an easy reflection. The camera cut briefly to Sunny, who nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Viola. Then it returned to Viola's face. She paused again, longer this time. Her jaw tightened slightly as if holding something back. Her eyes glistened, but she maintained control. Viewers at home could see the effort it took to remain composed. And then she said something that changed the entire tone of the interview. She explained that sometimes being asked to revisit those memories repeatedly can feel like reopening wounds that never fully healed. That while she chooses to tell her story to help others, there is an emotional cost each time she does it. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't a criticism. It was a truth spoken gently, but unmistakably. And everyone understood the meaning. Sunny's posture shifted subtly. She leaned back just slightly, absorbing what Viola had just said. There was a brief nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that the weight of the question had become clear. For a moment, it felt as though the roles had reversed. The interviewer was now listening not for content, but for understanding. Viola continued, explaining that trauma doesn't fade into history. It lives in the body, in the mind, in reactions you don't always recognize until you're placed back into conversations about it. Her words were calm, but they carried emotional gravity. She wasn't speaking as an actress promoting a project. She was speaking as a person describing something deeply personal in real time. The silence between her sentences grew longer. Not awkward, but reflective. Each pause gave the audience space to absorb what she was saying. And for Sunny, those pauses became moments of visible realization. This was no longer an interview about resilience. This was a conversation about the cost of resilience. The other hosts remained quiet, allowing the moment to unfold without interruption. No one tried to lighten the mood. No one tried to redirect. The studio audience, usually quick to applaud emotional stories, didn't move. They seemed to understand that applause would break something fragile that was happening. Viola then said that sometimes, when people ask her about her childhood, they are looking for inspiration. But what they don't always see is the emotional toll of revisiting those memories again and again. Her voice remained steady, but the honesty of that statement landed heavily. Sunny nodded slowly, her face reflecting empathy and contemplation. She did not speak. She did not follow up. She simply allowed Viola the space to finish. And that restraint became one of the most important parts of the moment. Because in live television, the instinct is often to fill silence, to keep momentum going, to maintain pace. But here, Sunny chose stillness. Viola concluded her response by saying that telling her story is something she chooses to do, but it requires strength every single time. Strength that viewers don't always see. She offered a small, gentle smile at the end, as if to reassure everyone that she was okay. But the emotional weight of what she had shared remained in the room. For several seconds, no one spoke. The cameras captured Sunny's thoughtful expression. Then Viola's calm, composed face. Then a wide shot of the table, where the other hosts sat quietly. This was the moment viewers would later replay in clips online. The moment described as you could feel the shift through the screen. Sunny finally spoke, her voice softer than before. She thanked Viola for her honesty. Not as a host thanking a guest, but as one person acknowledging another's vulnerability. There was no immediate transition to the next topic. No attempt to restore the earlier lightness. Instead, there was a shared understanding that something meaningful had just happened. Something unscripted. Something deeply human. And it had happened live, without edits, without preparation, under the bright lights of a daytime talk show. As the conversation slowly moved forward, the energy had permanently changed. What began as an interview had become a moment of emotional truth that neither woman had planned, but both handled with remarkable grace. And for viewers watching, the realization settled in quietly. They had just witnessed a turning point that went far beyond television. The shift in the room did not fade when the conversation moved on. It stayed there. Even as the topic gently transitioned away from Viola's childhood and back toward her work, the emotional atmosphere remained noticeably different from how the interview had begun. The earlier rhythm, the easy laughter, the familiar pacing of daytime television, never quite returned. The audience sensed it immediately. Their reactions were quieter, more thoughtful. Applause came later and softer than usual, as if people were unsure whether it was appropriate to break the reflective mood that had settled over the studio. Sunny Hostin's demeanor had changed as well. She was still engaged, still professional, but there was now a visible layer of care in the way she spoke. Her tone was measured. Her follow-up questions were gentler, less probing, almost protective of the space Viola had just opened. This wasn't a host recovering from a mistake. This was a host recognizing the emotional weight of what had just occurred and adjusting in real time. Viola, for her part, remained composed. She answered subsequent questions with the same clarity and grace she always brings to interviews, but there was a softness to her presence now, a quietness that hadn't been there at the start. It was the quiet of someone who had just shared something difficult and was slowly returning to steadier ground. The other co-hosts, who had largely stayed silent during the emotional exchange, re-entered the conversation carefully. Their comments were supportive, reflective, and brief. No one tried to shift the tone too quickly. No one attempted humor. Everyone at the table seemed to understand that the moment needed to be honored, not covered up. From a production standpoint, this was unusual. Talk shows rely on pace and energy. They are designed to keep viewers engaged with movement and variety. But here, the show seemed willing to slow down, to allow the emotional aftereffect to exist without trying to smooth it over. That choice made the moment feel even more authentic. The cameras captured small details that viewers at home noticed later when clips circulated online. Sunny's thoughtful expressions. Viola's steady breathing as she listened. The way the hosts leaned in slightly, creating a more intimate posture around the table. Even the audience looked different. People weren't smiling as much. They were listening. As the segment continued, Viola spoke about her current projects and her advocacy work, but now those topics carried a deeper context. Viewers had just been reminded that behind her achievements was a lived experience that never truly disappears. What changed instantly was not the content of the interview, but the way it was received. Every word Viola said after that moment felt heavier with meaning. Sunny, sensing this, allowed more space between questions. She gave Viola time to finish her thoughts fully. There was no interruption, no overlapping dialogue. It was as though the entire studio had collectively decided to move at Viola's emotional pace, rather than the show's usual tempo. This is something rarely seen on live television. There is often pressure to maintain momentum, to keep the show flowing regardless of what happens. But here, the emotional truth of the moment dictated the pace. And viewers noticed. Later, many would describe the interview not as dramatic, but as deeply moving. They spoke about the silence, the pauses, the way the conversation felt real rather than performed. In the studio, that reality was palpable. When the segment finally approached its conclusion, the applause felt different. It wasn't celebratory. It was appreciative, respectful. Sunny thanked Viola again, this time with a tone that carried more than routine gratitude. There was sincerity in it, a recognition that Viola had given something personal to the audience that went far beyond the expectations of a daytime interview. Viola smiled warmly, nodding gently, her composure fully intact, but her expression still reflective. As the show went to commercial break, cameras briefly caught the hosts leaning slightly toward Viola, speaking to her off-mic. Their faces showed care, not performance. For viewers at home, the broadcast cut away. But for those in the studio, the atmosphere lingered. There was no immediate chatter, no quick reset. People remained seated, quiet, as if processing what they had just witnessed. What changed instantly for Viola was not her public image, but the way the audience now saw her vulnerability. Not as a story from the past, but as something present and ongoing. What changed for Sunny was subtle but visible. She had navigated the moment with restraint and empathy, allowing the conversation to unfold without defensiveness or haste. That restraint spoke louder than any words could have. This was not a confrontation in the traditional sense. No one argued. No one raised their voice. But emotionally, it was one of the most intense exchanges the show had seen in a long time, because it revealed something rarely visible on live television: the emotional cost behind public storytelling. By the time the segment ended, everyone in the room understood that they had experienced something unscripted and meaningful. Not planned, not rehearsed, but deeply real. And that reality stayed with viewers long after the credits rolled. In the hours after the episode aired, viewers began to describe the interview in a way that daytime television rarely receives. They didn't call it dramatic. They didn't call it controversial. They called it honest. Clips of the exchange circulated online, not because of shouting or spectacle, but because of the silence, because of the pauses, because of the way two women navigated a deeply personal moment on live television with restraint and dignity. People wrote about how they could feel the shift through the screen, how the interview felt less like entertainment and more like witnessing something human and unfiltered. Many viewers expressed admiration for Viola Davis's openness, but just as many pointed out Sunny Hostin's decision to step back, to listen, and to allow the moment to breathe. The reaction wasn't loud. It was thoughtful, and that is what made it last. For Viola Davis, the moment became another example of something she has often spoken about: the emotional weight of sharing her story. In interviews afterward, she continued to discuss her past with the same courage and clarity, but audiences now had a deeper understanding of what it costs her each time she does. They no longer saw those stories as simply inspirational anecdotes. They saw them as lived experiences that still carried emotion in the present. That shift in perception mattered, because it changed the way people listened. For Sunny Hostin, the moment reinforced something she is known for, but that viewers don't always notice: her ability to recognize when a conversation requires empathy over momentum. Her choice not to rush, not to interrupt, and not to redirect allowed the exchange to unfold naturally. That restraint became part of the story. Media commentators later referenced the interview as an example of how live television can still produce moments of authenticity that no script could create. It was discussed not as a mistake, but as a rare instance where emotional truth took precedence over format. The View has seen many viral moments over the years, but few that were remembered for quiet intensity rather than loud confrontation. This was one of them. What made it culturally significant was not what was said, but what was revealed: that even the most composed public figures carry emotional histories that do not disappear with success, and that sometimes asking about those histories requires more care than we realize. Viewers began to talk differently about interviews like this. There was a growing awareness that when celebrities share painful parts of their past, it isn't simply storytelling, it is emotional work. And this interview made that work visible. For many, it changed the way they understood Viola Davis. Not as someone who had overcome hardship long ago, but as someone who continues to carry those experiences with her every day. It also changed the way they viewed Sunny Hostin, not just as a sharp interviewer, but as someone capable of recognizing the humanity of the person sitting across from her. The moment stayed in public memory because it felt real. No dramatic music, no arguments, just a conversation that unexpectedly reached a depth neither side had planned for. In a media environment often driven by spectacle, this stood out because of its sincerity. Even long after the episode, viewers continued to reference it when discussing meaningful talk show interviews. It became an example of how live television, when handled with care, can capture moments that feel closer to documentary than entertainment. And perhaps that is why it still matters, because it reminded audiences that behind every story of resilience is a person who has to revisit that story each time it is told. It reminded hosts and viewers alike that curiosity must sometimes pause for empathy. And it showed that some of the most powerful television moments happen not when people speak loudly, but when they speak honestly, and when others choose to listen. That day on The View did not produce headlines filled with conflict. It produced something quieter and more lasting: understanding. A shared recognition between guest, host, and audience that emotional truth cannot be rushed, and that live television, for all its unpredictability, can still create space for something deeply human. Subscribe to The Truth Narrator, like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and share this story with others who appreciate moments of real honesty on live television.